in Agritech includes collaboration with clients such as Mercy Corps, Shell Foundation, IDH, FarmFit, and the Rural Agriculture and Finance Learning Lab, known as RAFLL, the Ethiopian Agricultural Transformation Agency, the African Agricultural Technology Foundation, GSMA's Agritech team, the Tony Blair Institution, and one CGIAR. She previously worked on private sector corporate strategy and commercial due diligence at OC&C Strategic Consultants in London, working for FTSE 100 corporates, disruptive businesses, and private equity such as Apex Partners, Bridgepoint, Advent International, and others. Please help me welcome this wonderful panel. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So this panel is on Agritech and its relationship with food security. I think as we've already touched on in some of the sessions today, we're all familiar here, I think, with the pressing and increasing challenges to food and nutrition security in Africa that are only being exacerbated by recent events, as we all know. At the same time, there's huge potential for Agritech to be transformative in terms of increasing productivity and yields, in terms of increasing resilience for farmers, reducing post-harvest losses, increasing market access, and access to finance. This panel is we've got a very diverse panel here today that's going to cover a range of topics in Agritech writ broadly, so from looking at agriculture inputs to irrigation to looking at biotech and biologically advanced microbial products. But at the same time, there's a challenge here in terms of increasing the ability of Agritech providers to improve cost to serve and to drive capital to help these organizations scale up. So in this panel, we'll touch on a lot of these themes in relation to the pressing gap to meet SDG 2. So just to say my name again, I'm Annette Chow, an associate partner at Starbuck Advisors. We have a great panel here today, and I'll ask you each to introduce yourselves, and particularly to talk about your role and your organization's role in terms of food and nutrition security in Africa. So we'll start with you, Samuel.
Easy question. My name is Samir Ibrahim. I'm the CEO and founder of Sun Culture. We are scaling a platform that switches farmers from using carbon-emitting diesel and petrol pumps and climate-vulnerable rain-fed irrigation to solar-powered irrigation. And then we on-sell additional goods and services. We use consumer lending and carbon revenues to make the cost of solar irrigation cheaper than that of diesel and petrol pumps. And we use an embedded data science platform to help remove the inefficiencies in smallholder farming. We're the largest distributor of solar water pumps for smallholder farmers on the continent. We're just scratching the surface, though. There's a lot of work to do, especially in today's sort of web of crises. I think our role in the sort of food systems and food security spaces, the way we've mapped things out, and you need a lot of solutions working at the same time in order to actually solve the food crisis. But we spend in Africa, or in sub-Saharan Africa, $35 billion a year importing food. That's supposed to go up to $100 billion by 2030. Back in the envelope calculations are that you only need 26 million smallholder farmers growing food twice a year on 1 acre to grow enough calories to meet the global calorie gap. So we take it very much from a production side first, and just very much focused on figuring out how do we get people to realize that it doesn't actually cost that much money to solve these problems. To do what I just said, it would be about $13 billion, which is how much money it costs to run a World Cup. So a big part of our thesis and a big part of the role we're bringing to the table is showing that relative amounts of money to solve this problem are not very high, and seeing what types of platforms that we have to establish that moving money is fast is of the utmost importance right now. Thank you.
Okay, nice setup. My name is Looney Libis. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Africa Eats. We're an investment holding company, a little different than others. We started with a portfolio of 27 companies. They're based in 10 countries on the continent, all in the food and ag supply chain. We don't do any primary growing ourselves. We work solely with smallholder farmers. The companies we invest in typically buy from hundreds or thousands of smallholder farmers, aggregate that together, do a little bit of processing, and distribute that out to retailers. We've been doing this for 2.5 years as Africa Eats, 10 years as part of the Fledge Accelerator Network. And what we see as the key leverage point is to be the buyer of the outputs of the farmers. There's plenty of farmers on the continent. We're not lacking farmers. We're not, in fact, lacking food. They together grow plenty of food. They grow more than enough food to feed Africa and then some. But most of that food, or a big chunk of that food, gets lost on the way to market. So we're here to apply for-profit means of investing in these companies so that those farmers' outputs don't get lost on the way to market, so that those farmers earn more money, and we solve the problem of hunger and poverty in Africa through capitalism.
Thank you. I'm Lawrence Berman. I'm a founder at BioLevel. We are actually a UK business, but are very quickly seeing opportunities to support distribution partners throughout East Africa. Technology is kind of often sort of perception is technology as widgets and electronics, et cetera, visual displays. But ours is fundamentally a biotech business. So what does that mean? That means that effectively we have developed strains of microbes through years of development. Those strains of microbes, much like one's biome, one's gut, are developed to have synergistic relationships with the soil and the crop. And by doing so, you find that you can improve yields in many crops, and this is bionutrition. So what we're suggesting is it's not about specifically a type of biocontrol situation. It's not about a specific solution for a corn crop. It's a universal solution. And the important kind of contributor that we're finding, particularly in places like East Africa, is that our products in places like the delta of Europe, for example, the Netherlands, where we've done much work, we improve things in extremely efficient markets of agriculture by 2 or 3%. You find, which is enormous in these places, you find that our work in places like Kenya, we have seen yields in maize, we have seen yields in potatoes that are in double digits. So by pushing yield in a sustainable way with biology, we can dramatically reduce the sustainability issue around synthetic fertilizer, which we work and collaborate with very actively, but we level that and balance that with biological inputs that will serve the soil, but also serve the yield and health-wise the conditions of the farmers.
Hi, my name is Ruby Swichler. I represent an organization in South Africa called WestGrow. It's a provincial agency funded by the Western Cape government, so provincial government, and the city of Cape Town, beautiful city, for those that have traveled to South Africa. Our focus is investment promotion, export promotion, and tourism promotion. My role as head of the Agribusiness Investment Promotion Unit is to ensure that investors understand the agricultural landscape in our province. It's really the cornerstone of agriculture, if I could say, for South Africa. More than 55% of South Africa's exports in terms of agriculture and agri-processing, comes from this province specifically. So a very important sector. So besides sharing information about the agricultural landscape and the various opportunities, we also serve those that are already based there with their expansion efforts. So access to finance is important, assisting with red tape challenges for any investor wanting to land in the Western Cape. That's our role. And it's really important that everyone here understands that we act as an interface between public sector and the private sector. And it's really to understand what the opportunities are and to be able to showcase that. AgTech is high on our agenda in the Western Cape. particularly where sustainable farming is concerned, and I'll speak to that in the later topics. Thank you.
Thank you. I think a couple of themes already come out from those introductions from our set of panelists, that there's a huge amount to do and there's a complex set of things to do to make land, food and water systems more sustainable and more food and nutrition secure. At the same time, to your point, Samir, this is not necessarily about lots of shiny new technologies. It's not necessarily about spending a lot, but there's something about how the sector comes together. So maybe on that theme, if I can direct my first question to you, Lily, from the perspective of quite a unique investment firm, what are the areas that you see as currently the most exciting in Agritech for food security and the areas that are the most underinvested?
Yeah, it's, in terms of technologies, what we see makes the most difference are technologies that are over 100 years old. And first and foremost, that's trucks. And I didn't know this a few years ago. I expected, there's a lot of learning when you come from America and try and apply business knowledge in other places. One of the things that you take for granted is if you want to get something from here to there, you call the trucking company. And when you work with smaller companies, that's what they do. And then when they become $1 million a year companies, $5 million a year companies, there's no trucking company for them to call anymore. They become the trucking company. And so right now, our big push this year and into next year is to literally spin up food and ag logistics companies in Rwanda, in Tanzania, serving all of Eastern Africa. And the first of these got started 2 years ago, and those trucks are now flowing from DRC down to Mozambique, over to Kenya, up to Uganda. And it's frustrating that the other investors, I am an investor, but I have to raise money for the investing, I'm not seeing other investors seeing that problem and solving it. Seeing that problem and putting their money in there. I'm seeing investors want to find the next app. And that's nice. The next app might increase yields, but it doesn't matter if you can't get that extra products to the market because there's no trucks.
And just a quick follow-up question. Why do you think that is?
I don't know. It just seems like an obvious thing that's needed. It seems like an obvious thing that the British should have left there 60 years ago, before they handed off the control to these countries. I don't know. They should have also built trains. It would have been nice to have train networks all over the place. They didn't do that either. Right? They got some, but not everywhere. And the French should have done the same, and the rest of the powers when they came in. But instead, they just extracted the resources and left bad roads. So it's coming, and we will fund it, and others will fund it as they see this as become profitable.
Thank you. Ruby, I'll look to you next, given that your role is in thinking about promoting trade, agribusiness, and investment. So same question to you. What are the most underinvested areas, and are you seeing similar trends, as Luna pointed to?
Underinvestment, I think, would be platforms for people to share information where innovation is concerned. There's so many developments within various sectors within South Africa, strong sectors in agri, and often solutions in one sector could help the next. And I think that platform of sharing hasn't been digitized enough. Money hasn't been invested in terms of that share, because I think we could quickly innovate in many ways if that information was shared quickly. In terms of strengths and what we've seen really work in the last while, particularly where COVID was concerned, everyone had to digitize their efforts, whether it be, trying to meet the new buyer, and that's exactly what our provincial agency did. I'd be traveling into market on normal, most of us actually normal days, but no one could travel. So what do we have to do? Create platforms where we could actually meet with buyers, meet with investors. And how quickly, we were all surprised by, how quickly that happened, which is great. So luckily, that kind of, everyone understands that quickly, that acceleration took place, and how easy for investment to go into that, because it does work. But I think in terms of research and development and innovation, where Agritech is concerned, I think platforms in that regard need to be invested in.
Thank you. I'll turn next to our technology as solution providers of food security. So Samir, you've been growing Sun Culture to 6 countries. You've been thinking about access to finance alongside access to those technologies. And you were talking earlier to cost and what's needed to drive towards food security. So I just wanted to ask you as well, what would help you thrive in the sector, and in terms of investment, not necessarily in types of technologies, but in terms of areas that would help you thrive? What is biggest on your mind?
So I'm going to answer this question and the question you posed to the investors. What I think the whole thing is underfunded, and what really frustrates me is that I think it would probably cost less than $500 million to solve food security in Kenya. Full stop. Using existing technologies, most of which are over 100 years old. And I think the problem is that it's not sexy enough. Irrigation, trucking, improved seeds, logistics, processing is pretty boring. But I think that's one thing. But I think what that requires, and sort of what would help Sun Culture thrive, is that when you look at the rollout of agriculture technologies, existing agriculture technologies, right? We sell irrigation. The innovation that we have is on the financing and the operations, some of the hardware, but we sell irrigation. There's agriculture in this country we're sitting in right now, in the U.S., uptake of energy resources, of electricity, which has fueled agriculture development, has all been funded by subsidies globally. Every grid in the world is subsidized. My phone is subsidized, but it's just called a research grant. We don't have a lot of subsidies in the markets we work in, so it's very hard for farmers to acquire a bundle of products and services that help them become extremely productive. There's a nonlinear correlation between price and addressable market. So for example, for what we do, if we drop our price by 25%, our addressable market increases by 100%. But if we drop our price by 50%, our addressable market increases by 600%. So we have to think about, to get to your question on sort of what would help us thrive, what kind of funding do we need, we have to think about how do we drop our price, how do we drop the price of related products and services so that we create a bundle that can solve food security at scale. We've launched our carbon business, so we're using carbon revenues to self-subsidize, and we're lobbying donors to sort of mirror what governments have done with subsidies. And I spoke to a room of people recently, and I said that if we can figure out how to increase the price of carbon by about double for the type of work we're doing, and if we can figure out a $50 to $80 million subsidy program for food security in Kenya, I guarantee that within 90 days, I can raise the requisite amount of equity and debt and lobby the government to remove VAT and duties, because there's such a desire to sort of move these companies forward and invest, but you just need a few pieces to be tweaked. So I think what's needed is all the pieces getting put together, having conversations and sort of rolling and sort of thinking about how do we roll out in one country a national food security program for pilots. But it just takes a commitment to actually put money on the table and kind of take a little bit bigger of a swing, in my view.
Thank you. Are there any countries that you think are doing well at that we can learn from?
That's the Netherlands.
Yeah, the Netherlands is doing an amazing job. Yes and no. It's the context is different. I look at other sectors. So if you look at what in the pharmaceutical sector, one thing the Clinton Health Initiative actually did very well was they mapped out end-to-end supply chain for distribution of medicine. Costs are laid out very clearly. It hasn't happened for agriculture. No one has put forth a food security plan that can be vetted and put money across. So we can look at other sectors and say, hey, this has worked in other sectors, but it blows my mind that we have so many agricultural organizations and no one's actually put a plan on the table. Like, no one's been like, here's an actual blueprint where we can go and look at food security in one country. So I think looking at other sectors like pharmacy distribution could provide us with some hints on how we can start solving this.
Yeah, it's interesting to me. My past life before Dalberg was in much less sexy businesses in B2B services and logistics, and there's a lot of investor excitement around that. But I think what you say is very true around there needs to be a holistic approach across the whole ecosystem to make sure that works and to make sure that there's a scale for some of these cost to serve issues to be worked out. I'll turn to you next, Lawrence, in terms of the challenges you're seeing in growing your business, because you spoke to the impact on yields on sustainability.
Sure.
In terms of your products.
Yeah, from our perspective, the interesting challenge for us is we see solid, extremely good benefits on what our core focus is, which is basically improving yield, reducing synthetic fertilizers, using biology. The question then becomes a segment of, in agriculture in particular, but particularly in certain, the regional elements within, say, for example, our role in our advancements into East Africa, is the perception that, these bionutrition products and solutions are somehow unique for one country versus a different country. So you have very sort of siloed kind of systems by which you are bringing innovation to one place, and yet it basically means that the moment you cross the border, you start again from the beginning. And so there would be a great opportunity or a great possibility of bringing innovation to these regions if there was a means by which you could kind of leverage, perhaps regulatory or agencies, cooperatives or cooperations with organizations that have sort of quasi-national kind of interests. So that kind of means by which you can really, from our perspective, we're trying to bring innovation to improving yield. We don't see necessarily we see ourselves doing so with cooperations. We do see ourselves not necessarily going farmer to farmer, but those cooperations and the organizations that are out there that can kind of support those cooperations are vital, and making those kind of engagements, those cooperations, are essential for us, because our core technology is very thorough and very successful. It's just it's scaling that into these different markets.
Thank you. Lawrence, you spoke to countries learning from each other while at the same time being conscious of different contexts within countries, across countries. And I want to ask a question to each of you, actually, in terms of, I think we've touched on both solutions and businesses developed in Africa as well as outside Africa. I'd like to ask which ones you think have been most effective in moving the needle on food and nutrition security, but also what would it take to bring the best out of both of them? So maybe start with you, Samir, and then maybe we can have a quick round across the panel.
I think any technology requires, it's not a technology problem, in my view. We have, technology exists, whether it was developed on the continent or outside. It's the operational complexity of scaling it and the cost of it. Our secret sauce was technology at the beginning, but now it's the operations, the financing, what comes after. That's the only way it's going to scale. So I think it almost doesn't matter to me. It's just the operational complexity, but we've seen these old technologies. Irrigation has worked really well all over the world. Irrigation increases yields by 2 to 5 times regardless. Trucks work really well. So for me, it's the technologies that have worked everywhere will work in Africa. It's just how do you localize the context of operationalizing and move the amount of money that has worked outside into the continent. So take your standard irrigations, trucks, seeds, processing, the old list of things, and they'll work. It's just how do you roll it out at scale here.
Okay, one more challenge that I see from my seat, proverbial seat, not this seat. Not only is the kind of solutions that I look at not sexy at all, but I work exclusively with homegrown African entrepreneurs. And so in my work with accelerators and at Africa Eats, we see thousands of solutions, all from homegrown African entrepreneurs. And yet when we look at what gets funded in terms of, these are, again, younger companies, $100,000, $200,000, $300,000 a year, the kind of companies that get funding are generally the ones with CEOs that look like me, that come from the US or come from Europe, that come with an idea from outside saying, we have the solution, fund me, I'll build my African team and do it. And that's frustrating to watch that, because I see much better solutions coming from the people who grew up on the farm, right? Grew up as farmers or kids of farmers and are solving the problems locally. Not saying that some technologies from elsewhere are useful,
Indeed.
but the companies on the continent should be the companies run by the people who know these problems. And again, unfortunately, the bigger funders are not following that trend.
Yeah, but I would argue that there is clearly opportunities whereby innovation can collaborate with distribution partnerships, organizations that accumulate, multiple growers. To bring those innovations, I would suggest that that's not a Kenyan issue, that's not a South African issue, that's oftentimes a farming issue, an agriculture issue. The innovators, the entrepreneurs on the farm are fundamentally focused on doing the best possible efforts in growing their crops.
This is just the same problem we have in the States, where the statistics we saw a few years back with the Me Too movement came along, and we said, oh, look at VC. Let's look at the tech VC market. 94% of the capital goes to white men. 4% goes to white women, 2% goes to black men, and 0% goes to black women. Right? That was the fact 2 years ago in the US, or 3 years ago now in the US, in tech, in VC. And so if you look at the 5 billion or so VC that went to Africa last year, I don't have great stats on this, we don't have exactly the same view, but lo and behold, if you look at where the money went, it went majority to white men. Why did the majority of money in Africa for startups go to white men when they are, they're the 0% of the continent, right? Sub-Saharan Africa?
I wear frustration too with that. And from, being the middle person, always, having these discussions, key is to actually find the solutions on the continent, and we need to trust that. I think there's an education that needs to happen to see what is actually working and to understand what research and development has been taking place. There's a key focus for our province in particular with understanding, which projects are commercially viable in terms of research and development, because those are the ones that we should be investing in. But also, having the focus of partnering with those on the ground. Maybe it's not, a completely foreign investor coming in and owning the IP and trying to implement that. It's partnering with an organization on the ground who believes in the same yield or focus, and then working to actually have that implemented locally. Because once it actually is taken up locally by a local farmer, then it'll be far easier. But I think that partnership and collaboration needs to take place.
No, and I would argue, and just to follow on with that, is that a lot of the technology plays, we are simply a cog in a wheel that is, much bigger than us. So the integration and collaboration, for example, we develop bacteria. I mean, that's about as small as they come. We need to work with funding organizations. We need to work with distribution partners. We need to work with regulatory environments. And so that, by definition, is a multifaceted kind of collaboration. Now, from the perspective of obviously I can't change who I am, but I can agree with you that
it's the
capital should be financed.
I just advocated for trucks like a half an hour ago. The trucks aren't built on the continent.
Yeah.
Right? The trucks we're buying are coming from Asia. Ideally, someday they're built on the continent, but they're coming from Asia. That's fine. There's companies that have solutions that work in Africa. There's companies that have solutions that work in Africa. Let's bring those products in. But when it comes to actual companies up and running, growing on the continent, they should be built by Africans, right? Because it has to be built by Africans who know the problems. That's what I'm advocating for.
Yeah.
Thank you. So I think very clear themes there in terms of focusing on the fundamentals, in terms of operations, in terms of looking at commercial viability, but also at the same time that the technologies may not necessarily be new, but there's something around being part of a system where sustained and concerted efforts are needed. I'll just ask one last question before we open up to the floor and for any questions from the audience. But a lot of different things we've covered in the panel today. I'd just like to ask, what is the one thing from what you've learned from your journey that you would like investors or other solution providers to take away today? So we'll start with you again, Samir.
Funding comes very slowly. We need to figure out how to move money faster. Equity investors, debt investors take a very, very, very long time. And when you look at young businesses, let's say a business has been around for 3 years, they're raising money, and it takes them 12 months to raise money. That's 25% of their entire life of the company. And they're being asked to project what's going to happen then. So it's very tough to do that. Companies have failed because development mezz lenders have taken 1.5 years to fund. I mean, I've seen it happen to companies all over the place. So the time to fund needs to be a bit faster, and I think we can take lessons from venture investors in other emerging markets like Southeast Asia and Latin America and Central Asia sort of bring those lessons to what we're doing here, because I think we'll see a lot more success if we don't hold companies back by sort of over-diligencing a business we've never seen before. I think by nature of what we're doing, we're building a lot of firsts. We were the first solar irrigation company in Africa. Looney's probably working with a lot of firsts as well. And
Or onlys.
and you can't diligence that. So I think you just have to understand that the role capital plays is the role capital plays. You don't need to sort of go and pretend to be able to diligence things that you can't diligence. So I think there's just the speed that we can work with here.
Yeah, I could just say yes. Yes, and we'll do the and, which is the companies as they're growing need more than one type of capital. So I'm a holistic investor in Africa, primarily equity. I like equity, but I also run some funds that are debt. And in Africa Eats, we do everything. And that's the piece that is also a learning from the last few years, which is when a company gets an order from a big customer and they need invoice financing, well, the assumption from the other investors is you call the invoice financing company, they take care of that, we do X. We don't do that. Well, the problem is there are no invoice financing companies. And the next problem, they'll need operational capital. Oh, sorry, we don't do operational capital, we just do equipment finance. Well, that's nice, but then the company gets stuck. Or they do equipment, they need equipment finance, but we only do operational capital. And so it's not just the fact that it might take 9, 10, 12, 15 months to get funding. It might be that you got an order and you need to fill it. Or you don't need to fill it, but you'd really like to fill it because it makes your company bigger. And you can't because that investor doesn't exist. And so as the investors build their funds to come in and fill in all this gap, they need to come not with an idea of we're just going to be X or Y or Z. They need to come with money and need to deploy it as whatever it needs to be deployed as, which is more complicated and more work for us, but the opportunities are huge. You should put in the work.
Yeah, and I would also argue that there has to be confidence in the management team that they are going to allocate the capital. You're buying into a team, you're investing into a team, and so the allocation of that capital has to be given the responsibility of at the end of the entrepreneurs that are fulfilling that kind of vision. From my perspective, I think that we are more from a challenge that we find going into capital raises is it can be conceived as an esoteric issue or a concept of soil biology and biologicals and biofertilizers, but actually oftentimes the capital might struggle to understand the universality of it. The universality of it is no one sort of questions 100-year-old technology called nitrogen fertilizer. It's sort of like but yet that technology is extremely inefficient to ship around the world. It's extremely unsustainable. Its CO2 characteristics are enormous, and yet the understanding of how a nutritional cycle works within the soil for a lot of investors suddenly becomes extremely complicated and extremely technological, and actually there's a much clearer vision if one understands these simple pathways, and from the perspective of capital doing a lot of due diligence and yet not understanding the true essence of businesses can take enormous amount of energy and a lot of education, whereby you could actually get things done in a much more efficient manner and actually bring that capital along to the next opportunities quickly into markets. So if you had obviously less siloed regulatory kind of environments in place in markets.
For me, in closing, I think there's an education that needs to take place, given the role that I play within agriculture and agri-processing. There are solutions that Africans do have. I think they were very reactive. Many have been very reactive. You've got to be pressed to change the way you produce, and climate change has done that. There's a real focus on sustainable farming by many in our sectors. And it's showcasing, the innovation that is taking place. Just a quick example is a company called Terraclim, South African company. Initially started out in the wine industry, and it was analyzing and mitigating climate change data. So where's the next best place to actually plant a cultivar of grapes, given the change in seasons? And that's being, looked at in the apple industry now and other industries. And who would have thought, And I think there's a huge win in identifying solutions on the ground, because we understand the context of Africa. And there are huge opportunities for investment. It's just knowing who to speak to. And there is support on the ground.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'll just open up to any questions from the audience. I think we'll have a roving microphone in the few minutes we've got left.
Say thank you. And all what you've said about where the money went to, the technology is there. Studies have been done. So the missing piece here that I find is, of course, the government body that should be here and accountable for trying to put this together so that investors aren't afraid to go in and to invest on the continent. So thank you so much for your input. It was quite insightful, and I just wanted to say that.
Thank you. Echoing the thanks to the panelists as well.
Thank you, Nick. Thank you. Thank you.
Susan Payne from Holistic Investments in Mauritius. My question is this: do you find, or how do you find that, just referring to the previous question, how do you find working with governments on the ground in Africa? Because in my experience, governments generally have been quite unhelpful in agriculture, and there's a lot more, how do I put this? There's a lot more talking than walking. I don't see a lot of action on the ground to support agriculture. I find that actually also going between certain countries, Mozambique is a good example where we have investments. Mozambique makes it very difficult to enter because their visa program is so onerous. And it comes down to even the red tape of getting into a country that actually puts off investment. And I wonder how much of a voice you have and what you think about how these governments should improve their practices to enhance investment locally. Because there's no question from my perspective that more needs to be done. The question is how we make that happen.
If I could answer, yeah, that's fine. As a provincial agency of the Western Cape, I hear your frustration. Visas come up very often for investors wanting to land in the Western Cape. And that's where we come in as a provincial agency, is being that middle person. Because if you go directly to government, not to speak badly about mine, it doesn't move as quickly. Our agency focuses on addressing issues like that. It may not be solved overnight, but it will be highlighted every time we do actually have to report back in. So there's an advocacy side to the work that we do. And maybe that's a suggestion then for every other African space trying to deal with a situation like yours. It's not perfect, but we do highlight the issue.
We find that it's different from country to country. We're working with the Togolese government on Africa's first solar irrigation subsidy program. Very receptive, young team around the president, really pushing sort of the digitization of Togo in general. I also, sadly, I think the food crisis is pushing governments into more action. We're finding that there's a lot more appetite for sort of country-level programs. There's a sort of a retail and cook stove company called Coco that partnered with the Rwandan government recently. We're starting to find that in crisis, if we can come with a package, it makes it much more easy for governments to sort of accept us. It's still a work in progress, but there seems to be more reception today, I think caused by political instability, food crises, etc. And sort of we're coming and saying, look, we have the funding and the partners and everything lined up. You just have to do X, Y, and Z. Maybe remove VAT and duties, maybe make an enabling environment. Very few things you need to do, and that becomes much easier.
Yeah, my answer is like yours, Susan. Mostly we don't talk to governments. They're not doing anything for us, and we're not doing anything for them except making jobs. The only time we've interacted lately is the EU built a large banana processing facility in Kisii, Kenya. Like a lot of these big projects, they didn't actually do a business plan. There was no operator as part of the plan, and no trucks. I had a little company in Kisii, Kenya. They went to go get a permit, as you need, for setting up their own little factory that they had built. They walked in, they said, "Oh, you have an American investor? Would you like to run a banana factory?" So we just inherited a banana factory without paying for it. That was lovely. We'll take more of those if they're out there. If anybody knows of any other factories that got built with no operators. I got operators.
It's quite nice.
It's nice, but literally, part of the project, great example, part of the project was giving seedlings to 12,000 farmers. And no one thought of how do you get the bananas back from them. This is, again, why I'm so hooked on trucks. We now have to figure out the plan for how many trucks do you need to pick up bananas on a daily basis from 12,000 farmers, or not every farmer every day, and where are you going to put the who wants the bananas? The government just wants the farmers happy. They would like the bananas, purchased and sent somewhere. But this project also didn't come with any customers. So, we have a really good high-class problem. We have a brand new giant banana factory. Probably will do a few $1 million of business in a year or two, but we have to build the business now.
I don't think we can. We used to not talk to governments either. I don't think we can solve the problem without engaging governments, because the speed at which we need to scale inorganically, all of us, you can't do it without governments, because you need to reduce price and you need to sort of reach scale. Because again, if it's 26 million farmers, it's 10. If it's 50, there's no sort of organizing body that will allow you to reach those numbers quickly. I mean, fast, right? We're kind of running out of time here.
How do you get more investment to come in? Yeah, don't charge the ag companies the import duties for the equipment that's not built on the continent.
Yeah,
we'll buy it if it's on the continent, but it's not. So
yeah, but our fundamental problem, for example, and similar to government stories and horror stories before, is that when you're trying to bring innovation into different markets, I won't name countries, but the perception is the government wants to go through the conventional methodology of a process. And so in this case, if it's considered, for example, fertilizer, which is fundamental to supporting yields in crops, if it's perceived as a chemical fertilizer, then it's understood and therefore come on in. If it's something that doesn't have that characteristic, then the suggestion was, maybe you can fly it in your suitcase and I can start doing some work on trialing. I was like, well,
they do this with chickens, right? So the chickens are certified per country.
Yeah.
So you can have an improved chicken in Tanzania, but you can't sell that chicken in Uganda. You have to go get it certified in Uganda. It's a chicken.
Yeah.
We're not talking about something that's going to spread a global pandemic around, hopefully. But it's a chicken. But yeah, you can't do the genetics across country lines either.
So I suppose in some respects, I think what would really, be what we're talking about is sometimes it's provincial government, but sometimes it's pan-African governments that can be really starting to coordinate with one another to really start to bring, innovation, bring, basically capitalistic processes, and bring, consumer, shifts, that don't stop at the border.
Can I just say one thing? Because someone that operates on the ground, the reality is this for everybody. If there's any government official here, please listen to this, because this is really vital. I think that governments do not help. And not only that, from the visas to the work permits to the economic zones that should be created to the tax incentives, all of those are lacking in many countries. And when a country gets it right, when there's a change in government, like in Zambia, when HH becomes empowered, which is terrific, it's still, there is, as good as HH is, there has been a lack of urgency in getting things done on the ground in agriculture. So the message to governments has to be, get urgent, we need to create food in volume, and you're dragging your feet. So you've got a lot of people like ourselves that are very incentivized, that want to get things done, and governments are almost bridling us. I feel like there is no support, and it's not strong enough, and it's not there. So I think all of us have to kind of deliver this message to governments and to local governments and say, you know, get your skates on, we need support and we need help, and it's actually beyond funding. It's beyond what's within their realm. It's literally down to making sure when someone lands at your airport, they don't have to go through days of visas to get into your country. It's as simple as that.
I think reminding them that the alternative is an Arab Spring as well. I think that we've seen that there's sort of a fear around food. I mean, food security is national security, right? And I think that message needs to be shared much stronger as well.
And the African Continental Free Trade Agreement hopefully would address so many of those issues. And I think that gives me hope. They realize the importance. It's everyone working together. Collaboration again gets brought up. How important that is.
Agreed. It is urgent and there is hope. So on that note, if you have any more questions, please do come to our panelists, or if you have a spare banana factory, do come up to them. But thank you so much. I really want to thank everyone and the panelists.
They had the last session in the day and practically in the whole program, and they did very well. Thank you so much, everyone. And as we travel back, we wish you safe journey back to your countries. Bye.